How do we bridge that yawning gap between the demands of a 24/7 lifestyle and the fundamental need to sleep and take it easy? All this week, BBC Breakfast on BBC One finds out what can be done. Now on BBC Two, The Daily Politics with Andrew Neil and Daisy Sampson.
Morning, folks. This is The Daily Politics. IDS told them to come and get him, so they did. Today's the day Tory MPs at last vote on whether to back or sack their leader.
Iain Duncan Smith has refused to bow out. Now he must face the judgment of his parliamentary party. Where did it all go wrong for the quiet man? What was it that so offended these malcontents? The bookies are suggesting Iain Duncan Smith won't last beyond 7 o'clock tonight. So if IDS does have to wave goodbye to the Tory leadership, who's in the frame to take over?
Over the next 2 hours, we'll gauge every shade of Conservative opinion. We'll have constant updates from Tory HQ and from the House of Commons, where we'll also be live at midday for what could be the final Prime Minister's questions of Iain Duncan Smith.
How will he do today? And what will the voters make of this feverish activity here in SW1? Well, Laura can tell us. Laura.
Today I'm in Beaconsfield in Buckinghamshire, and it's one of the safest Tory seats around. Away from Westminster, I'll be meeting Conservative voters here and trying to gauge if they think IDS has been stabbed in the back or if they too have been sharpening the knives.
Thanks, Laura. Now, 2 months ago, the official Tory line was that there was no conspiracy to undermine the leader. Then IDS admitted that there was, quote, a small band of malcontents out to do him down. By yesterday, the band was big enough, at least 25 Tory MPs. It could have been a lot more to trigger a vote of confidence in the Tory leadership. This afternoon, 165 MPs will do just that. Now, they're a very unpredictable lot, and Mr. Duncan Smith could surprise us yet. But the consensus here in Westminster is that IDS will be out by the early evening news. Daisy, how did it come to this for IDS?
Well, Andrew, it has certainly been a turbulent couple of years in the job for Iain Duncan Smith. Now, he seemed to be catapulted from nowhere to become Tory leader back in September 2001. Dubbed by some the ABC candidate, now that stands for anyone but Clark, he ended up head-to-head with the former Chancellor Ken Clarke, and in the vote of all Tory party members, he won 61% of the vote.
It's a great honour now that this party and its members have bestowed on me, that they have placed their trust in me to have elected me as their leader.
Well, things seemed to be on the up earlier this year when, in perhaps one of his biggest successes, the Tories swept the board at the local elections, winning the most amount of council seats. Tory electoral success suddenly seemed possible again.
Last night and today has been a fantastic result for the Conservative Party up and down the country. And I want to start by thanking all of those hard-working councillors, council candidates, association members and members of the party who have worked so hard to actually deliver Conservative councils into power and back into power up and down the country.
And to some, he seemed to have achieved the impossible, burying differences over Europe and producing a range of eye-catching policies that began to get the party noticed again.
He hasn't been the unmitigated disaster that some of his critics would have you believe, you know. He has produced some quite interesting policies. He buried Europe as a problem for the Tories with unexpected, spectacular results. And also, the bad thing about him, if you like, was his weakness, and he inherited that from William Hague. So there you have it. He's had good policies, he buried Europe, and his weakness wasn't really his fault.
Well, that was some good stuff, but it clearly hasn't been plain sailing for Mr. Duncan Smith. The Maastricht rebels soon got a taste of his own medicine, with the sniping and infighting among Tory MPs who were frustrated by what some saw as weak performances.
When I settle on a course, I stick to it. Do not underestimate the determination of a quiet man.
Some say he never looked or sounded like a future Prime Minister, although the faithful applauded they never quite believed in him, and the former Maastricht rebel proved persistently prone to paranoia.
A small group of my parliamentary colleagues have decided, consciously, to undermine my leadership. My message is simple and stark. Unite or die.
But although it was all smiles outside, behind the scenes at Tory HQ, senior staff came and went in rapid succession. IDS appointee Barry Legg was forced to resign as Tory Chief of Staff 3 months into the job, when it emerged he hadn't been properly appointed. He also faced criticism of the way he handled the party's position on the war with Iraq. Failure to make any impact in the Brent East by-election, where they were beaten back into third place, seemed to set the tone for things to come. Well, media training helped strengthen the voice, but some found the new aggressive style on display at the party conference pretty unconvincing.
The quiet man is here to stay, and he's turning up the volume.
And just when things seemed like they couldn't get any worse, Betsygate hit the headlines. Allegations that he'd employed and paid his wife Betsy for work she didn't actually do. And then came the plotters.
And if there's a rap on the door and Michael Spicer walks through and says, "I'm sorry, I've got 25 names," what do you say to him?
Go and put them in the telephone box.
Well, after all that difficulty, you'd think IDS would just want to pack it all in and go home. Not a bit of it. We had more fighting talk this morning.
I actually encouraged on Monday colleagues to put letters in, because my view is that we need to have this decision today. We can't go on like this with one small set of colleagues briefing against and undermining me. So my view was, please, let's have this confidence motion. Let's settle this today. I think the choice is simple. Either we decide to give me that mandate and for me to go on tomorrow to lead this party in opposition and to take the fight to Labour, present that alternative, or to plunge ourselves into internecine warfare for the next 2 to 3 months and have to pick up the pieces when the public says, what have they been doing?
That was Iain Duncan Smith this morning. Now, let's speak to those who've got the vote, the Tory MPs. It's 165 of them. I'm joined by 3. John Greenway, he served on IDS's front bench, but he wrote to Sir Michael Spicer calling for this vote of confidence, which he's now got. And Geoffrey Clifton-Brown, he's another critic of the current Conservative leader. And over in the House of Commons, Angela Browning, she's a staunch supporter of IDS. Let's go to you first, Angela Browning. Thanks for joining us. What is the strongest argument you are making for retaining him as leader, and how is it going down?
Well, the main reason is that Iain was elected just 2 years ago, and if you actually look at his success in terms of leading the party, he took us from -20 in the opinion polls to a point that's been higher than I've known in my 11 years as a Member of Parliament, when he announced the party's new range of policies at party conference, 5% ahead of Labour.
Well, that was one poll for one day. You're now back to neck and neck. You're still flatlining at just over 30%.
But the point is, he's taken us from -20. And the gap closing with Labour has been consistent, and at the very point at which we start to roll out our policies and go ahead of Labour in the polls, then we have all of this. Now, quite frankly, anybody who believes that this is in the interest of the Conservative Party to now spend our time when, for example, we're going to have the Queen's speech, the autumn statement, the Hutton inquiry, in the run-up to Christmas, having yet another leadership election, that won't just be flatlining, that will take us back.
All right, we're told by some people quite close to you this morning that these arguments that you've just made, they're not cutting much ice with your fellow colleagues.
I have to tell you, Andrew, in the last 24 hours, sounding out colleagues, if we had felt, and if I personally, as a friend of Iain's, had felt that he was going to be really humiliated today, I would have advised him not to proceed with this ballot today.
Will he win?
But that isn't the case.
Will he win? Will he win the result today, the election today?
I believe it is eminently winnable, and that is why I am working hard and encouraging others to give him their support.
I mean, everything's winnable, I suppose, but will he win?
I believe he will, and it's winnable in the sense that I believe this is now a very close run thing.
All right. John Greenway, He brought you squabbling party together over Europe. He has given you some policies which you haven't had for many years, even under William Hague. And at least, it's not a great result after 6 years in opposition, but at least you're now neck and neck with Labour in the polls. Why are you getting rid of him?
Well, I think we need someone who can communicate those policies rather better than Iain does. I think we need someone that the electorate looks at and says, yes, I can see this man as a Prime Minister. And that is Iain's problem. I have said right throughout the last 4 or 5 days since I went public on calling for this, that Iain has to be congratulated and thanked for his achievements. But what this is about, as he rightly says, is can we defeat this government at the next election? I believe we can, but I think we have a better chance if we have somebody else as our leader and someone who actually has more experience of political office than he has.
Geoffrey, Clifton-Brown, is it just a matter of communication? Policies are fine. It's a matter, is it, of Tory men rather than Tory measures?
Well, can I just say first that I think we should thank Iain, and he may well win the vote tonight. But if he doesn't, then I think we need to move forward to somebody else. And I think the real problem in the present situation, if I may say so, is that we've not been holding this government to account. At a time when taxes are going up to a record level, we're making teachers redundant.
No, well, we know that. You're not holding them to account because you're so busy fighting among yourselves.
Well, that's why we need somebody else to take on the mantle to expose this government.
Right,
I think the fighting among ourselves, Andrew, is overdone. There clearly were a few that were unhappy.
Well, speak to Daisy. She was at the Tory party conference.
And also, yesterday MPs were saying to me, you know, we can't have anybody worse than Iain Duncan Smith, and why won't he do? Why is he insisting on calling this confidence vote? Why won't he just go? He's going to be utterly humiliated.
Well, Daisy, may say so. I think this vote will clear the air. Whoever wins this evening, we've got to back 100% and move forward to expose this government and to proclaim our excellent policies.
Angela Browning, the problem seems to be for a lot of people who bear Iain Duncan Smith no ill will, is that he's just not up to it. You take The Sun this morning, he did his best, but he's just not up to it. The Sun, the Mail, the Financial Times all come out against him. Even the Tory Graph couldn't bring itself to write an editorial saying vote for your leader. The game's up.
It isn't up at all. And the reason we're in this position today is because for the last 6 weeks, we've had briefing, we've had people in the shadows trying to undermine him personally and as a consequence, doing huge damage to the Conservative Party. And that is why we're at this position today. Not, I believe, because of Iain's actions, but because of the actions, I'm sorry to say, of some of my colleagues.
Are you referring to the two gentlemen next to me here?
No, I'm making no names. I was very pleased to hear that people are saying today's decision will mean we should all row in. I pray God they'll keep that promise because they haven't in the past.
I wonder whether your party's not just ungovernable now. I mean, this is what, the 4th election you've had? Sorry, Angela Browning, I'll come back to you. I'm talking to John Greenway at the moment. Maybe you're just ungovernable now. You'll get somebody else. There'll be a honeymoon and then you'll all start the backbiting again.
I don't believe that at all. Not for 1 minute. I think we are eminently governable. And I think, unfortunately, the new rules under which Iain was elected are flawed and ended up with a situation where we had a leader who was voted in my view, because people didn't want the alternative more than they wanted him, and he did not command the support of the party in Parliament.
But on a technical point about the rules about the confidence vote this afternoon, rather than the if we do have the full leadership election following on from that, is it right that we won't know how many votes it will either say yes he did it or no he didn't do it?
My understanding is that it will be a broad brush answer, yes he did or no
so
he didn't.
But in that case, if he wins the vote by 1, he doesn't really have the backing of his parliamentary party, but we'll never know.
We will never know.
I'm not so sure.
I bet we will know.
Well, there'll be rumours, surely.
Your party leaks like a sieve. We will know
what
Andrew,
the numbers
can
are.
I just come back on a very important point you've made? Is the party ungovernable? The reason that we have a problem with the party at the moment is we haven't found an identity for ourselves. The Labour Party has stolen all of our clothes. We need a leader who can clearly identify what the Conservative Party stands for.
And this is what Iain Duncan was saying last night as well. He was saying you're having an identity crisis. Yes. But who's the man or the woman to give you an identity?
Well, I hope that we don't have to go through a bruising election in the country. We can have a unity ticket of Michael Howard and David Davis so that we have one name to put before our membership.
Would you go along with that?
Totally. And I've said on the record that I think Michael Howard has easily our best front bench performer, and it's to his credit that
surely
having held a high office, he's still there at the coalface fighting this government, proving to people how strong he is.
But if you were to give your grassroots no democratic choice, give them a choice of one, surely that means that you gave them a democracy last time. You didn't like the decision they chose, and you thought, oh, well, they don't know what they're doing, we'll take the choice away from them again.
Not a bit of it. Not a bit of it. I tell you this, that what the grassroots are saying is, you, party in Parliament, you decide who you think it is that you feel can win an election for this party at the next election.
So they're saying, we don't want a voice, we give it back to you.
No, the reason why, and they will support us, I believe they will, the reason why we're in this situation, in my view, is because in the last 3 or 4 months, the perceived wisdom that Tony Blair could not be defeated, therefore it didn't matter who you had, has gone. The perceived wisdom now is Blair can be defeated, and if we have the right man at the top, and we all row in behind him, as Angela says, then we can get this government out of office. Well, that's why I've done what I've done.
Let me go back to Angela Browning, because I want to ask you an issue of substance here, and it relates directly to his performance in Leader. I mean, one of the issues in which the government has its back to the wall right now is Iraq. The situation in Iraq, the reasons we went to war, and all the fallout from the Hutton Committee. Now, isn't one of the huge weaknesses of your leader's leadership has been that he positioned your party in such a way that he couldn't land a glove on the Prime Minister on one of the issues on which he's most vulnerable? And the symbolic evidence of that was the way you got thrashed at Brent East by-election.
Well, first of all, on the Iraq issue, I think Iain felt, and he's a very honourable man, that the briefings he was given about the initial problems in Iraq were done on Privy Council terms, and I think he felt it was above party politics. He's been extremely vocal on some of the issues that have come out in the Hutton inquiry, which I think concern us all.
He was on holiday during the whole of the Hutton inquiry. The Tories, whole Tory party, went AWOL during the Hutton inquiry.
No, I'm sorry. I actually think you'll find David Davis was the person who was on duty and did quite a lot of media through the Hutton inquiry, but Iain himself has called the Prime Minister to account on some of the evidence that he gave. But you know, Brent East, yes, of course, we would have liked to have done better at Brent East, but let's be realistic. Brent East is a seat that was once held by Ken Livingstone.
You came third.
In nobody's dreams.
You used to be second, you came third.
Because the Labour Party vote collapsed and there is a natural centre-left vote there. And if you're centre-left and you don't vote Labour, centre-left people tend to vote Liberal Democrat.
Okay, it's what those of us who support the Scottish rugby team call a moral victory when we go down 51-9 to France. Angela Browning.
I don't think so, Andrew.
All right. We'll see who's France and who's Scotland tonight. Thanks, Angela Browning. Good to see you for joining us.
Thanks.
So you're both Howard people, is that correct?
I think Howard would be the man.
Okay.
We have to wait and see who throw their hat in the ring.
And you assume he's going to lose tonight, IDS?
I would have thought so, but how does any of us know? It's a secret ballot.
I know, because you're a politicist, love. We don't know.
Many colleagues. I just hope colleagues view this as a long-term issue, not just...
Can I just make one comment about Iraq?
Sure.
Whatever one's stance on Iraq, we should have been asking many more probing questions. We weren't.
That was partly the understatement of my question to Ms Browning. Anyway, we've got to leave it there. We've got a lot more to do. I thank you for joining us. Good to see you on the Daily Politics. Good to have you watching the Daily Politics. It means we want your views on this story. Would you back or sack IDS? And if it's the sack, who should replace him? You can email us, daily.politics@bbc.co.uk. I can see the emails pouring in to my screen here right now. Or text message on 82237. You lucky digital satellite viewers. My digital box has just been sent back to Sky without one. But if you've still got yours, press that red button and a cornucopia of information comes before you.
Well, Andrew, from one cornucopia to another, the pressure is certainly on Iain Duncan Smith here in Westminster. But what does the rest of the country make of all of it? Well, we've sent Laura out for a spot of early morning drinking in the safe Tory seat of Beaconsfield to test opinion among the punters there.
This is Beaconsfield in Buckinghamshire. It's one of the most prosperous pockets of the home counties. And perhaps unsurprisingly, this is true blue Tory territory. Even in the troubled times of recent years, this has remained one of the safest Conservative seats in the country.
Enough letters have gone to Sir Michael Spicer, so members of the party in places like Beaconsfield will most likely lose the leader they chose. This is a wealthy commuter town, and it certainly feels a long way from the backroom dealings at central office. But how do the Tory faithful here think their erstwhile leader's been faring?
Well, I think they haven't given the man a chance, have they? Let's see how he goes, and then knock him off his perch if he don't.
The whole confidence, I think, in the party is probably going to be undermined as well. It's very sad what's happened to him, but I think it has to be now. But I think it's more important that it's over with very, very quickly.
I was surprised. I thought this morning we'd wake up and he'd step down and they'd be able to get on and appoint somebody else, but seems like he's going to fight to the end. So, yeah, I think he's been treated fairly, but he shouldn't be there today going for the vote.
I think he's got everything going for him for this election. But yeah, I hope to see him through, actually, myself, yeah.
Well, one woman there who does hope that IDS will stay after today's vote. But I have to say, talking to voters here in Beaconsfield, supporters of IDS have been pretty thin on the ground. Will you join us here in the Royal Saracen pub in the centre of Beaconsfield in Buckinghamshire? With me to talk about this week's dramatic events are Jonathan Steele, who's the constituency chairman here, and also David Kirchheimer, who's from the neighbouring constituency of Chesham and Amersham. Jonathan, I'll come to you first. Why have we got to this stage?
Well, I think it's been a progression. I don't think there has been a particular dramatic event during this stage which has suddenly made it all very dramatic. I think there's been a progression in terms of timing over the last, almost going back a year now, during which the situation of Iain Duncan Smith has come more and more under pressure, not only within the party, but within the country as a whole. And I think it's that gradual progression to a crisis now that has arrived. I don't think there's one particular major event over the year that I could point to.
But indeed, we met at conference, actually,
yes,
and you said
yes.
then he should go. Why?
I think there does come a time when you realise that in terms of loyalty to the party, you have to be loyal to the party rather than just to one man. I'm extremely loyal to the party, but I have to say that in being loyal to the party, it doesn't mean to say that I feel I should be loyal to a leader who, in my view, is not the best leader, or indeed the leader we should have at the moment. So in being loyal to the party, I'm actually saying that we should have a different leader. It sounds contradictory, but I feel quite strongly that loyalty to the party comes before loyalty to any one individual.
OK, David, I'd like to bring you in here. Jonathan has been very outspoken. Have Jonathan and his colleagues been stirring things up unfairly, do you think?
Well, I think this is started off by the media, who didn't like Iain Duncan Smith from the beginning, and then this has been frothed up by the media, and then with the perhaps unwise interference from certain individuals in the party who go and talk to the press all the time. I mean, for example, Jonathan at conference was in every single newspaper. He appeared on The World at 1. He was speaking everywhere, and he was described as the chairman of Beaconsfield, which he is, but one wonders whether he speaks for the people of Beaconsfield or whether he's speaking as an individual.
Except, come on, there have been lots of briefings going on. You can't say this is just a media
I was in Blackpool, Lancashire, and there was absolutely no whisperings in any place that I sat. Now, perhaps I was in the wrong restaurants, the wrong bars, entertaining the wrong journalists. There is a minority who do not like Duncan Smith, never have done, and I would consider that it is probably those people who are ignoring the fact that the MPs put forward Duncan Smith with Ken Clarke as somebody they could work with to the members of the party, and the members of the party, rightly or wrongly, overwhelmingly voted for Duncan Smith.
Okay,
now,
well,
therefore, you should
then?
support Duncan
Well, let's
Smith.
move on then. Why did people vote for him? What are his strengths then? Because we don't hear much of them, do we?
Well, you don't hear much of them, perhaps because you don't broadcast them. But if you like opinion polls and you look at what has gone on in the opinion polls, the Conservative Party was in the dumps and has come forward. And perhaps people should look at our policies rather than personalities.
But he has to be a leader, though, doesn't he? What are his strengths as a leader?
Do you remember, you're probably far too young, and I'm not old enough to remember cabinet government, where you had a first among equals who was the Prime Minister or the leader of the opposition. He is not bad as being a leader, but he doesn't like to hog the limelight. As one lady said to me, he is listening, he is local, he's not Hollywood. We don't like Hollywood, and that was not a Conservative supporter, and she was going to vote for the Conservatives at the next election. What will happen now, I do not know.
OK, Jonathan, I'll bring you in here. We've heard a bit about IDS's
Yes.
strengths. What about his weaknesses? I
Yes.
mean,
Let me just answer one point that David
Briefly,
made
if you can.
first, very briefly. I am totally loyal to the party, but my views expressed here and elsewhere are my own personal views. I do not speak, and I've always made this clear, I do not speak for the constituencies as a whole or representing the executive of our constituency. I speak my own views because that's what I feel strongly.
Okay.
I cannot speak for other people who are senior in the Beaconsfield
OK, well, you certainly
constituency.
do speak your own views. Let's hear some of them then. In your view, what are IDS's weaknesses? Why does he need to go, in your view?
Right, well, let me just go back one stage first, very quickly. When IDS was voted in against Ken Clarke, of course he got a majority against Ken Clarke, but I maintain the reason for that was not particular popularity of Iain Duncan Smith, but because there was an overwhelming majority of people in our constituency and in the country who did not want to go further down the European route. And I maintain that it's actually really important because people were voting against a further progression towards Europe, which meant that they had to vote for Iain Duncan Smith because Ken Clarke's view was different.
OK, well, gentlemen, I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there. We've run out of time, but we will obviously be returning to this later in the programme. But for now, from Beaconsfield, back to you.
Thanks, Laura. Looks like they could argue till the cows come home. There are lots of cows down in Beaconsfield, though. It's a nice part of the world. We're getting lots of emails coming in from you too. Daisy and I will be reading them out later, so keep them coming. But for the moment, it's time for our regular look at the morning newspapers. And joining Daisy and myself today are Mary-Ann Sieghart of The Times and journalist and broadcaster Ekow. Eshun, welcome to you both. We go straight to what used to be regarded as the House newspaper of the Tory party, the Tory Graph, as it used to be known as well. They've done an editorial. The thing that surprises me is that on a morning when you would think the Telegraph could have substantial influence on the way MPs may vote, they haven't told them how to vote.
I find it utterly extraordinary. I mean, every Tory MP who's going to pick up the Daily Telegraph today for guidance is told, well, these are the questions you've got to ask yourself, but there are absolutely no answers. It really is extraordinary. I mean, I do see there is a slight problem for the Telegraph in that they recommended that the membership vote for Iain Duncan Smith in the first place. And so they may feel, as a matter of honour, it would be wrong to say ditch him now.
Brand new editor, so they could say, well, that was then, this is now.
And all the
precisely.
more dramatic if they'd said, we made a mistake, or times have moved on, it's time to change. Or no, we still back them, be loyal.
Absolutely, one or the other.
One or the other would be nice. What did you make of it?
In fact, they actually try and go for both, don't they? Because halfway through the editorial, they do suggest, well, you know, he actually could win. He might win, but anyway, let's consider the alternatives. And then they don't quite come down with an alternative line at all. It's a weirdly ambiguous stance, which I think reflects, anyway, some of the turmoil that seems to be at the heart of Tory politics right now, anyway, which is that I don't think there is a clear, wholehearted alternative. I think what the Telegraph says is precisely, I think, what ordinary voters
represents
look at right now, which is that it's very difficult to choose one single person who you can say, yeah, this is a great alternative, this is a great leader.
But on the other hand, what they're talking about here is not who should be leading it next, but should IDS stay or go? And frankly, I think the whole country is pretty united in thinking he's got to go.
The interesting thing in the editorial at the end, though, is a technical point, which is that they say the Tories have got to act in a way that only one person emerges from the parliamentary party, so they don't have to go through the whole business of the vote in the country. I mean, there is a Tory appetite for that, but do you think it's going to happen?
No, sadly. It won't happen because of one man, and that's David Davis.
Yes.
I mean, almost all the parliamentary party would like to elect Michael Howard by acclaim, but there's one man who believes that he ought to be leader of the Tory party instead and is determined to run for it. I think the other runners will be prepared to stand back and say, no, fine, Howard can get it.
If you were a Tory party member, what would you do today?
If I was a Tory party member today, well, I did that.
If I repeat it a third time.
I was trying to put myself into that mindset.
You don't get asked this on Newsnight Review. No, this is much more difficult.
In all honesty, actually, in all very seriousness, I would actually vote for Iain Duncan Smith.
You would?
I would. Yeah, I would, because I think, as the polls stand, there isn't an alternative leader right now who seems to be able to galvanise the rest of the nation. I think, to be honest, if you look at the rank and file of the Tory party, they're the ones who voted Iain Duncan Smith in. They actually still believe in the idea that actually a leader takes more than a year, takes more than 2 years to come to fruition. I think perhaps if you're a Tory, you can afford perhaps to have some faith in the idea of leadership and the idea that somehow a leader isn't an instant hit, person. He's actually someone who can grow and can be nurtured into the job.
All right. Well, that's an interesting view. It's not the view in the Daily Mail this morning of Max Hastings, the former editor of the Telegraph. A proper grown-up, he says here, referring to Michael Howard, and he's got a gorgeous wife too. Who would ever accuse Max of being sexist? Interesting, though, that, you know, we as journalists have all concentrated on the huge makeover that Michael Portillo has undergone. But in many ways, Mr. Howard has undergone a more low-key, more subtle, and maybe after tomorrow, a more successful one.
Yes. He has actually really reinvented himself in opposition. He has knuckled down to it in a way that Michael Portillo hasn't. I mean, Portillo's been touring the TV studios and being a single mum in the Midlands, you know, whereas Michael Howard has been sitting there grinding the figures, showing where Gordon Brown is going wrong. He is actually, and he really has. I mean, people in the Labour Party have said to me that Howard is the first man, first shadow chancellor who Brown has actually been quite scared of.
And you can see that. You're shaking your head.
Yeah, I'm shaking my head because I think Michael Howard plays better to the media than he does to the public. I still think the public thinks of Michael Howard, something of the night, thinks of him essentially as a Dickensian lawyer. He's got that slightly creepy feel to him.
I understand that, but I can assure you that in 1995, 96 and 97, he did not play well with the media. Remember Jeremy Paxman 13 times.
But I think one of the interesting things about Michael Howard, which perhaps is a reason why the media cut him more slack than the general public, is that he does seem to have this very extraordinary two faces of when you meet him in person, you expect him to be a rather scary type of man because that's the way he comes over on the telly, and actually he's the reverse. He's extremely charming, and I think that's perhaps why people who know him in real life write this kind of thing, and then, you know, the rest of us normal Joe blogs read it and can't really square it with the image we get from the telly.
I agree with you, but do you know what's interesting? I had always thought that his main drawback was that he repelled voters, but we at the Times ran a focus group last week where we got a whole bunch of people who used to vote Tory but had voted Labour in the last two elections, and we showed them videos of speeches and TV interviews and that sort of thing with about 4 or 5 Tory leadership contenders. And Michael Howard was their head and shoulders favourite.
Really?
I was really surprised.
Was that not just name recognition?
No, because they actually saw them in action.
I see.
And they said they liked Howard first and then Theresa May.
What's interesting, if you read the Max Hastings piece in the Mail, it damns with such faint praise. Essentially, Max Hastings' point is that he's the leader who can die with dignity. That doesn't seem to be a ringing endorsement of a Tory politician or leader.
You have to remember that in the English class system, you know, Michael is just a grammar school boy, and Max would really prefer a proper public school leader.
Well, I could have written for Michael Anker. Actually, no, funny enough, he was saying
that he's got no chance.
No, he was saying that no toff can ever lead the Tory party again. Labour Party. That was a good Freudian slip.
No, we've got a toff leading the Labour Party at the moment. Let's move on to the Daily Mirror, a well-known ally of the Conservatives as a newspaper. It's not a bad front page, is it? You know, comical Tory, based on the man in Baghdad. I'm in complete control of my party. I'm crushing the infidel rebels. I will lead my party into the next election.
But Andrew, the funniest thing about this front page is it is one of the funniest ones today, but it's also the fact that it was not a Mirror sub-editor that came up with this. It was a loyal worker in Conservative Central Office who thought of the idea, emailed it around as a joke to his friends, and it ended up in the lap of the Mirror and on their front page. So it is a real own goal all round.
Let's finish up with a really serious story this week, which has had no proper coverage because of the Tory leadership. Tony Blair indicated that the General de Chastelain in Northern Ireland had let him know more than what he had told the public, and that the arms destruction of the IRA was really rather good, and if only we could all know it. It turns out that General de Chastelain didn't tell Blair anymore. Did he mislead the House of Commons?
Well, I think he's certainly guilty of loose language, yes, and he ought to correct that. But equally, I don't believe for a moment that he didn't know what arms were decommissioned by the IRA.
Really?
And Bertie Ahern also claims that he knows what arms were decommissioned by the IRA. If de Chastelain didn't tell him, he will have had a guy in there who did.
I mean, I found this quite a damaging story for the Prime Minister. Is yet another example of the Prime Minister being economical with the truth.
It's a long and creeping problem, and you don't get the sense that it's going to go away as a problem. The perception of Blair, I think, has shifted significantly and will get worse. Will get worse after the Hutton report comes out. And it'll be interesting to see what happens with the story, whether it runs, whether it rises to the top outside current Tory farrago.
Certainly Quentin Davis, who speaks on these on Northern Ireland for the Conservatives, he attempted to make a very big deal about this earlier this week in the House of Commons, and actually was slapped down by the Speaker because he went around it in a rather ham-fisted way, because he wasn't asking questions. He was telling the House what he thought, which of course you get told off for. But they're certainly they're onto it. They just haven't made a very good fist of it yet.
I mean, it is a big story. We were going to run it as our top leader today, but then of course the Tory
got taken over by events. That's why the government has got a kind of get out of jail for free card at the moment. May not last. We thank you both for coming in on this historic day for the Conservative Party. Good to see you both. While I was speaking to Daisy there, I could see a man standing outside Central Office, not the leader of the Conservative Party, but our man on the front line of the Tory Party, in the rain, Guto Harri. Let's go to him now. Good morning to you, Guto.
Good morning.
Tell me, as you speak to the Tories at the moment, are they concentrating on tonight's vote to determine the future of Iain Duncan Smith, or are they already setting their sights on another vote to choose the next leader?
Depends who they are, of course. Those people around Iain Duncan Smith are really giving that last push to hang on to power, and they're saying that he has a realistic chance of getting there. They've been doing their sums, they've been hauling people in for private little chats, and the leader is in, I'm told, very perky mood. He's been preparing for Prime Minister's Question Time with his closest aides. He's been cracking jokes. He's been doing impersonations of scenes from that soap opera, The Office, and he's fighting to the end. They think he might pull it off. Now, nobody else really does. It might happen, but I'd be surprised, and so would most of the people in the rest of the party. So as you suggest, Andrew, of course, there's a lot of manoeuvring going on, a lot of people saying, I have nothing to say at this moment. However, 5 seconds past 7 o'clock tonight, give me a call.
And we may have to give you a call too, Guto, on that. But it is true, is it not, that the alternatives to Iain Duncan Smith, all of whom are in the shadow cabinet, are already planning their leadership bids?
Yes, I wish I had time to sort of drive around Westminster seeing where the telephone lines are being put in and where the extra emails are going. It's not reached that stage yet, but manoeuvring, yes. People guessing who will be on each other's campaign teams, yes. Who are the kind of people who could be bought off, and what would it take to prevent them from going for the leadership themselves? All those calculations already being made. Now, I've spoken to a few of the possible contenders face to face. They just smile very coyly, but they're clearly thinking ahead to what happens immediately after that result is announced tonight, because essentially they'll be surprised if Iain Duncan Smith survives, to put it lightly.
And one of the surprising things tonight is that, as I understand it, Guto, maybe it's changed a couple of times, so bring us up to date if you know, that we're going to be told, obviously, whether he got a majority or not. I think it's 83 he needs out of the 165. But we won't be told what the result is. We won't get the exact numbers. Why?
Well, that's my understanding too, and you can see why, because if it is dreadfully bad, and some people who don't particularly like Iain Duncan Smith are claiming that he's heading for humiliation, about 20 votes out of more than 160 MPs, well, clearly nobody wants to rub his nose in it. Likewise, if you scrapes a majority of 1 or 2, then again, they don't want the rest of us going on about half the party didn't really want him. How can he possibly claim that to be a mandate? So there's a temptation to hide the figures, but I'm also told by people there'll be 4 or 5 counters in that room, tellers in that room. The odds of that kind of thing in this world of politics not leaking in the end, pretty rare, I think.
Guto, we know that you're going to get us the result, even if they do try to keep it secret. We know you'll find it out for us. We better leave it there. Thanks for joining us this morning. And obviously, if there are any breaking developments, we'll be straight back at Guto there at Central Office. Now, we should stress that though most of the press this morning and the majority of broadcast journalists think that the defeat of Iain Duncan Smith is a foregone conclusion, Tory MPs are an unpredictable, some, not me, but some might say even a duplicitous lot. You can't believe a word they say in these kind of elections, so you can't rule out an IDS victory. But speculation's already rife about who might take his place. Daisy spent the morning on the phone to her bookie. Daisy, who's in the frame? When will we know?
Well, I wish I had all the answers, Andrew, but what I do know are who the runners and riders in the Tory leadership race might be. They're heading to the starting post, but there are a few important hurdles they've got to jump first, like the fact that, well, they already have a leader in the shape of Iain Duncan Smith. Obviously, he's facing a vote of confidence this afternoon, and if he wins a simple majority of votes cast, he remains the leader and all challenges are off for at least a year. But if he doesn't, he has to resign and he's out of the race altogether, in which case the leadership contenders will be put under the starters' orders. So, who's in the race? Well, the favourite, as you've been hearing, is the Shadow Chancellor Michael Howard. There he is on his horse, popular on the right of the party. He served under Mrs Thatcher and made his mark as a tough Home Secretary in the Major government. But can he win over the Tories' modernising tendency and put behind him Anne Widdecombe's famous comment that he had something of the night about him? Also in the running is Shadow Deputy Prime Minister David Davis. Now, he's also a right-winger, but he styles himself as a man of the people. The son of a single mother, he grew up on a council estate, and he's hoping that that background can give the party some credibility. And what about a flutter on this outsider? The people's favourite, Ken Clarke. Now, his problem, in a nutshell, is Europe. He's stood twice for the leadership already, and both times his unflinching pro-Euro views cost him that job. But of course, any of the contenders could pair up to form a dream ticket, trying to unite the party behind them. Now, I've had an email this morning from Simon in Cheshire. Simon asked who he should be putting money on, given that the front runner never wins. Well, Simon, I asked an expert on your behalf, Graham Sharp, from the bookies William Hill.
Well, Michael Howard is the 11-10 favourite. That's bad news for him because favourites never win. David Davis, who was the favourite, has drifted out to 7-2 second favourite. Michael Portillo has come in from 20-1 to 7-1. And then you've got the people like Michael Ancram, Theresa May, they're 16-1. And you're going down, along with Tim Yeo, then you're going down to the no-hopers, 66-1 Anne Widdecombe, 500-1 John Major and Edwina Curry. Why they should be grouped together, I can't imagine.
Cheeky. Well, plenty of speculation at Westminster as to what might happen and who might take over. But what do the Tory activists think? Well, let's go back to Laura, who's been finding out. Laura.
Thank you very much indeed, Daisy. Well, you join us once more in the Royal Saracen pub here in Beaconsfield, and actually the local Conservative Association sometimes have their meetings in here. Well, with me are three prospective voters. Firstly, I'd like to talk to you, Guy Caddish. People are always going on about young people voting. Who would you like to see as the next Tory leader if IDS goes?
Well, I'm afraid it would have to still be IDS, because the answer is who's better? Who is out there to do a better job than he can? And no one springs out.
And do you think he can stay, though, after all of this?
Well, if he gets the vote of confidence, if he comes through all this, then he has to do. People have to back him, but at the moment, it's all in the air.
OK, thank you very much indeed. Doreen Stewart, who would you like to see as the next Tory leader?
Oh, it's very, very difficult to say, and I, off the top of my head, Iain Duncan.
Why do you say that?
He speaks extremely well, without any hesitation. He's a very easy person to listen to. I know it's not all down to charisma and all the rest of it. I mean, I know IDS, I'm sure, has put in some marvellous policies, some structure in the party, but we have to have more than that, and we have to come out more.
OK, all right. Anne Cundy, who would you like to see as the next leader, just briefly if you can?
Well, I don't want to see anybody but next leader. I want to see Duncan Smith continue and lead us into the next election. I see no reason why he can't do that.
OK, thank you very much indeed, all of you, for joining us. In a few minutes, we'll be talking to some of the Tory activists here in this constituency, but back to you for the moment.
Thanks, Laura. She's still always in a pub, you know, even in leadership elections.
Cunning, isn't it?
It's very. It's probably opening time as well. Let's find out what's going to happen. Assuming Iain Duncan Smith loses tonight, let's assess the runners and riders, two doyens of British journalism. Observers of the Conservative Party, in particular, Matthew Parris and Michael Brown. Welcome. Michael Brown, let's get straight to the chase. I have it on pretty good authority that Michael Howard already has a campaign up and running in the background. His campaign manager is Liam Fox, and he's ready to go for it.
Yes, that's right. And I mean, effectively, his campaign's been running for some time because David McLean, the government chief whip, who's been making all these ludicrous pronouncements, is not a stupid man. He knew exactly what he was doing to Iain Duncan Smith. We must never forget that the chief whip, David McLean, served under Michael Howard, and that campaign in embryo has been...
So, Michael, you're saying David McLean did in his boss, Iain Duncan Smith?
Yes, of course he did. Yes, absolutely. Look at it.
Deliberately made him look silly.
No chief whip would go around saying, we're going to summon these in for a career development talk, in the knowledge that that would do anything other than make the leader of the party look utterly stupid. So there's no doubt in my mind whatsoever that David McLean will be very much behind a Michael Howard campaign, which is in embryo, been going on for some time.
So the phones are in, I'm told. There is even an office almost up and running. Oliver Letwin tonight will probably, after the vote, assuming it goes against Iain Duncan Smith, will also join the Michael Howard campaign. Is it a bandwagon that can't be stopped?
Yes, it can't be stopped. It's won already. Nobody else need bother. I think the only interesting question now is who Michael Howard decides to take into the tent with him.
Can I just disagree with Matthew on one little point?
We like
that. It's only a little point. If David Davis were to come second, I agree, a long way second behind Michael Howard in the parliamentary ballot, he is going to be the runaway winner.
Right.
But somebody will come second. And if that somebody is David Davis, and if David Davis chose to take Michael Howard to the Blue Rinse Ladies, and they will feel that if any stitch-up is going on Westminster, they will feel very sympathetic to David Davis, who is already very popular out there. He could get it, but I agree with Matthew that he runs the risk of having an IDS situation. So it is probably the case, ultimately, that some kind of circumstance will occur whereby Michael Howard will get it. I wouldn't...
Okay,
Matthew? I don't agree, Michael, that the mood in the country, amongst the party and the country, I think has changed. There's a real feeling of bewilderment. A feeling that perhaps they foisted on the parliamentary party the wrong leader last time. And if the parliamentary party shows a clear preference for one candidate, I think the country will endorse it.
Well, I still think that there is going to be immense anger out in the constituencies after this afternoon, and I would not... this deal... dream scenario, unite behind one candidate, has got to be handled very, very carefully with the constituency party workers.
We were told this morning, Daisy, weren't we, that the main aim of the Howard campaign now was to stop David Davis becoming second, because if they could get Michael Ancram or Tim Yeo, or other names in the front, to become second, and Howard first, they would then fall back and it wouldn't go to the country.
This is phenomenally complicated, so I think we might sort of take just a moment to explain exactly what we're talking about. Basically, the Stop David Davis campaign would mean trying to force him to come third, so that his name would not go to the party at large for the final two. So it means wrangling, vote rigging the situation so that somebody other than David Davis comes second.
Let me tell you, that is how we ended up with Iain Duncan Smith rather than Michael Portillo or Ken Clark.
Because of vote rigging.
So it's a very dangerous thing to do.
All right.
You know, if Julian Brazier happened to stand as well, he could end up by being leader if you'd go down that road.
Let's get away from the minutiae of Tory tactics and ask you a broader question, Matthew Parris. How did a man who in the mid-90s was kind of universally regarded as the most unpopular politician in Britain become now the new likely leader of the Tory party?
It's a mystery. You and I remember, and it's not that long ago, when he was Dr. Death. He was a touch of the night. He was the most unpopular politician, the most unpopular Home Secretary for a long time. That was never fair. He was always a better, more interesting, actually more moderate candidate than that. But he's not a cuddly character, and he's never going to look like a cuddly character.
He might frighten the horses, in other words, Mr. Blair and Mr. Brown. They're a bit frightened of him.
He'll do well as a hatchet man, but he needs to surround himself with a couple of teddy bears.
He's not modern when you talk about the sort of the liberal wing of the party or the modernisers wing of the party. He doesn't fit in that wing of the party, does he?
No, and a lot of people blame Michael Howard for the debacle which was caused exactly a year ago this week when he took a very moralistic stand on the whole palaver of gay adoption, which landed Iain Duncan Smith with his first major leadership crisis. But I will say this about Michael Howard, and I've just been rereading some of both Matthew's and my sketches about Michael Howard, first when he was in the shadow cabinet in the William Hague days, and then when he returned in the Iain Duncan Smith days. And he really took to this job of Shadow Chancellor against Gordon Brown. We watched Michael Portillo slaughtered. We watched Peter Lilly slaughtered. We watched Francis Moore slaughtered. Suddenly we saw a man who could actually beat Gordon Brown, and that's how he's got to where he's got today.
Let me ask you then another point to try and put this in strategic context. Is the Tory party now getting in the process of getting rid of its Michael Foot with IDS? Maybe it had two Michael Foots with IDS and William Hague. And is it now going for its Neil Kinnock in Michael Howard, which is the man that puts the party way back on the road to power, but doesn't bring it back to power?
There's truth in that, but I think it's unfair to IDS. He's not entirely a Michael Foot character. Michael Foot didn't move ideologically. IDS has actually prepared for the party a really good platform, and if they get a good leader to stand on it, they could do well.
And in terms on the ground of all this modernisation business, in his quiet way, Iain Duncan Smith has got Ian Dale, the openly gay Conservative candidate for the highly marginal seat of Norfolk North. We've got a black candidate who's standing for the same safe seat of Windsor. A lot of very interesting candidates have actually been selected very quietly up and down the land these past few months as a result of Iain Duncan Smith's steady work underground.
All right. We're in the final seconds. I just want to get your view, just to clarify. Will they come forward in the end with one candidate and it won't go to the country, and that one candidate will be Michael Howard?
That is my guess.
All right. And your guess?
They'll try, but they'll have to treat with David Davis, and they mustn't mess him about.
And if it does go to the country, will it still be Michael Howard?
Yes.
And in your view?
Probably.
All right. Well, that's
well, I have to say, judging by the emails and the eyebars we've had this morning, they all want Michael Portillo. So, but given the choice between Howard or Davis, I think our viewers will go for Howard.
They'll have to tune into This Week on BBC One on Thursday if they want Michael Portillo. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us. Let's go straight back to Laura. She's got some party loyalists there in Beaconsfield. It's a safe Tory seat. Laura, who's the favourite down there? What's going on?
Well, let's just find out. I'm joined now by some Tory activists here. We've got a senior councillor, the Deputy Mayor and the Deputy Chair of the Constituency Association all here with me now. Elsie Barton, I'll come to you first. You've been a councillor for 29 years. Yes. You've seen a lot of change in the Tory party. Who's your favourite to be the next leader?
Well, I really would like to keep to Iain Duncan Smith, and I would like this fighting to stop. If it's not going to, then we have to find a good leader. We really need somebody to do something about getting this Labour government out.
And who would that be for you then? There's huge amounts of speculation now. You know the names. Who would you pick?
Well, I don't know. It's very, very difficult. It is really very difficult to know who to choose. Michael Howard has been promoted. Well, I could stick with him. There's some I don't want to stick with.
OK. All right. Alan Walters, you're the Deputy Mayor here in Beaconsfield. Yes, who would you go for?
I think Elsie was right. The first thing we have to do is get rid of this Labour government. That's the first thing.
But you can't do that until you've got a decent leader. We can't do that until
we've got a decent... Well, firstly, we've got now the policies. Now the leader comes next. We are now in this position that our MPs have put us in. We actually don't get a say in this unless there's a vote of no confidence. So I'd like to wait and see whether, in fact, there is this vote of confidence actually goes through or not. If IDS actually does gain the confidence of the Parliamentary Committee, then I think what we should do is put our weight behind him, get rid of all this fighting, 110% through until the next election. And I wouldn't want to hear another thing until then.
OK, all right, Alan, thank you very much indeed. Barry, that's fairly unlikely, it seems, this morning that IDS will stay. So who would you like to have instead, then?
Well, if, in order to reunite the Conservative Party, I do stress if, and Duncan Smith has to go, by a process of elimination, I think it comes down to Michael Howard, who has a wide experience, he is articulate, and I think he's more than a match for that artful fellow Brown at question time.
OK, all right, Terence Goodman, would you go with that, Michael Howard?
Absolutely, I reimburse all that my colleague here says. Michael Howard is articulate, has an analytical mind, and has been the only front bench speaker that I know of who's been able to has had any effect on the Chancellor and has been able to expose the fallacies of his policies.
Would he be able to shed, though, some of his history, some of his baggage from the past? Because in many ways, as Home Secretary, he didn't impress everyone, did he?
Well, he wasn't popular with the criminals, but as you rightly said, if you lock them up, they can't do any damage outside. Okay. And I find it difficult to argue with that one.
OK, Terence, thank you very much indeed. Well, Adrian Hilton, you're the Deputy Chair of the Conservative Association here in Beaconsfield. Yeah. Who will you go for if IDS goes?
As yet, there is no vacancy, and I think, in a way, the question is premature. My comment is possibly also irrelevant at this stage, for the simple reason that I'm in a party, the average age of which is 64 or 65. I think William bequeathed us a dog's breakfast of a system to elect our leader by. I'm now expected to hope and pray that the membership will appoint a leader that the electorates in the country will find appealing and wish to vote for. Yeah. That is as possibly hopeless as expecting Brian Sewell to give his blessing to the winner of the Turner Prize.
Well, you may say, Adrian, that you think your view is irrelevant. I don't think it is. I'm interested to know who would you plump for after 7 o'clock tonight if IDS doesn't win the vote?
Whoever it is, the Beaconsfield Association will be uncompromisingly loyal to them.
Will you give
That's
me
all
a
I have
name?
to say.
That's okay.
No, whoever it is, we will be loyal to them.
Okay, Adrian, obviously you're not going to actually reveal who your own personal choice would be, but Caroline Strafford, you're also a Tory member here in Beaconsfield. Who would you like to see?
Well, first of all, I've got to choose somebody, if I have a choice, who's going to appeal to the 6 million voters who haven't voted Conservative. We need to have a full choice, we need to be democratic about it, and there's still time, if there is a leadership challenge, to have the system changed. It's in the rules of the 1922 committee, and they just have to consult the board. And it's really important that we have as wide a choice put as possible. And it would be marvellous if it went out to the whole country and they did an American system of primaries. We've got to be much more democratic about it and attract young people, all sorts of people, and not stitch up the whole thing.
It's certainly an interesting point. Maybe the voting system was perhaps at fault when IDS came in, but very briefly, who would you like to see? Give me an answer.
I personally, I think if I'm given a complete choice, would go for David Davis.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much all indeed for joining us. There'll be more from us later with a panel here in Beaconsfield. We'll be watching Prime Minister's questions. IDS hasn't been famed for getting on particularly well in that arena. Will he today? But for now, back to you.
Thanks, Laura. We're going to be back with Laura in Beaconsfield in that Tory constituency after Prime Minister's questions to get reactions from the grassroots as to how the Tory leader did. And PMQs, it's just coming up to 12 o'clock. It's going to be a vintage one today. Will it be the last for IDS as Tory leader, or will he demolish all before him and cause Tory MPs to rally to his flag? And how will the Prime Minister play it? With me today are the former editor of The Express, Rosie Boycott, the Conservative MP, David Amess, and the BBC's political editor, who's always with us on these occasions, Andrew Marr. Let me come to you first. You're always with us, but the occasion's rarely like this. I can't remember a Prime Minister's questions taking place just before a Tory leadership election.
Andrew, we often ask, does Prime Minister's questions actually change anything? Well, this time it actually could, because we're all assuming, everyone's acting on the basis that Iain Duncan Smith's going to lose this vote. We don't know that at all. And the quality of his performance in the next half hour could have a significant impact on some Tory MPs who are wavering. So it could make the difference between Iain Duncan Smith remaining Tory leader and losing that position.
Well, let's ask the man with a vote here. We're just observers, the rest of us. Is Iain Duncan Smith going to win tonight or not?
I've no idea at all. There are some people who like him, some people don't like him. He's going to address the party at 2:30, and then he will be explaining to us what his plans are for the next 2 years.
Could you be influenced in how you vote tonight by his performance at PMQs in a couple of minutes, or is your mind made up already?
My membership of the Conservative Party for 36 years has all been about trying to get a Conservative government, and I feel more determined than ever that that is what I want, and I want the party to unite behind our leader. And I think it is important how he performs today at Prime Minister's question and how he addresses the party at 2:30.
Sure, but could it influence your vote, or have you already made your mind up?
I'm not going to discuss this live on TV with people listening who would never vote Conservative and who regard this as a wonderful,
not listening,
as a wonderful show. I think this is too important.
Seconds.
The British people want a different government. They want to vote Conservative. That's all I'm interested in.
I want to bring Rosie in a minute. I understand all that,
think.
and you've had your say. I'm not asking you, because you told me before we came on air that you wouldn't tell me who you were going to vote for. All I'm asking you is your mind made up who you're going to vote for?
I've spoken to my local Conservative association, but the conversation is between myself and the local
yes or no would do.
Association.
Let me do my third question. Third time, same question. Is your mind made up?
My mind will be totally made up after I've listened to what Iain's got to say to us at 2:30. And none of us know what he's going to say.
In other words, this has got to be one hell of a performance by him in the next few hours, on which his complete future is hanging. And how many people do you think in the Conservative Party are in your boat that are withholding their vote till they see what he can come up with? It would have struck me from listening to it and watching it that most people had already made up their minds, and whatever he pulls out today is not going to be enough.
I think there are a few who genuinely haven't made their mind up.
But only a few.
And you're one of them?
A few. Well, crikey, there's only 165
Well, I mean, a few
Conservative
could be as
MPs, so...
I'm flogging a dead horse. I know when I'm beaten. How do you think the Prime Minister should handle PMQs today?
Very straight.
Yeah.
Very straight, very magisterial, not try and do any clever tricks, absolutely straight from the hip, no crowing over them. They're in enough mess anyway. He can afford to be a very big man today.
I mean, it is remarkable how the government, I think it's the third time I've used this phrase as one, it's got a kind of get-out-of-jail-free card at the moment. I mean, this...
They can't believe their luck. They can't believe their luck. I have to say, you know, if the Conservatives, you know, either come out with this resolved in Iain Duncan Smith's way, or come out with a sort of Conservative coalition, government of national unity, if you like, they all rally behind somebody else, Michael Howard or whoever it is, it's not at all impossible that within 6 months' time they'll look in a much stronger position than we do now.
Stacey, you've been snowed under by
Totally snowed under.
emails.
We've been asking people, you know, should he stay, should he go, and so on. We've been absolutely snowed under with replies on that. Most of them saying he should go. But we've had some specific technical questions also about Prime Minister's questions. We've said this could be his last PMQs, but actually this time next week we won't have a new leader.
No, we were careful. We said it could... no, even his last PMQs as Tory leader.
Yeah.
He loses a vote of confidence, but he will have to stay
As
acting Tory leader
that's right.
until they choose a new one.
In real and human terms, if he decided he was just going to go and hand over
Would
to
he
his
hand over
deputy,
to
Michael
Michael
Ancram,
Ancram, who'd do
then I'm sure he
PMQs
could do
maybe.
that.
But handing
but
over
of course,
to Michael Ancram, who could be a candidate,
Yes.
would be an
And that would give
interesting
Michael
development.
Ancram a pretty unfair advantage. Look how good I am.
it would give him a pair of heels, wouldn't it?
Yes,
That's
I mean,
right.
on that-
High heels.
We've also had Simon, who's sent me an email saying, I have a simple solution to the question of opposing the government, as there'll be no leader from this evening. Then at next week's PMQs, the 6 Tory questions should go to Charlie Kennedy. And after the nation sees how he uses them, there'll be a tidal wave in favour of giving him a permanent third question, which is something that the Daily Politics says instead of the
We've
two.
been out wanting Charlie to get a third question. It's part of the Daily Politics campaign to stir things up. Michael Howard, for all the heavy baggage he carries, Labour would be frightened of him, wouldn't they?
Would, but I find it almost amazing that one is facing the prospect of Michael Howard, who for so long
It's an amazing
was so
turnaround,
disliked.
isn't it?
I mean, the shadow of the night was sort of a pretty lightweight in terms of the criticisms that were flung at him.
All right.
That he should be now in this pole
Now,
position.
I'm going to interrupt you, and
Quite
I'm going to go straight over to the House of Commons for Sean Curran.
Good afternoon. Prime Minister's questions just about to start. He's being asked a question by a Labour MP.
I hope the whole House would join with me in condemning the brutal and wicked terrorist attacks on the Hotel Al Rashid on Sunday, on the Red Cross and Iraqi police stations on Monday, and the further attacks that took place yesterday. These attacks are the work of evil people who do not wish to see a stable and prosperous Iraq, and we shall continue to do everything we can to thwart them and reconstruct the country. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others in addition to my duties in the House. I shall have further such meetings later today.
Sean Simon.
Could the Prime Minister please tell me how to explain to my constituents in Erdington that they can get better cancer treatment if they move to London?
That was Sean Simon, who's the Labour MP for Birmingham Erdington.
Make sure that those drugs that are passed by the NICE guidelines are rolled out across the whole of the country is one of the things that we're looking at now. But it's only as a result of those guidelines that we've actually been able to increase the amount of people who have got access to life-saving cancer drugs. And as my honourable friend will know, the 3-year progress report on the NHS cancer plan showed that cancer deaths are down by something like 10% in the past few years. We've seen the largest fall in lung cancer in Europe among men, the largest decline in breast cancer among women, and there are 30% more cancer consultants. All of that is only as a result of the extra investment going into our National Health Service.
Iain Duncan Smith.
Can I join the Prime Minister in these condemnations of the attacks in Iraq and also our commiserations to those of the families and people who have suffered directly as a result? According to the Home Office, which country has the biggest crime problem in the Western world?
Got it. What I can assure him is that if he's talking about the crime rate here, as I say constantly, under the British crime rate, British crime survey, crime rates are down 25% over the past few years. And that contrasts very much with the doubling of crime under the Conservatives when they were in office.
Speaker, figures released by the Home Office last Friday show you are now more likely to suffer crime in Britain than any other country in Europe or North America. So will the Prime Minister tell us then which country has the highest level of violent crime in Europe?
Mr. Speaker, again, as I have said to him, yes, violent crime has risen in this country in the past few years. Violent crime has been rising in Britain for 20 years, but as a result of the street crime initiative, street robbery is now down, and overall, crime is down, not up, in this country.
Speaker, again, the Home Office tells us there are more violent crimes in Britain than any other country in Europe. And that includes Germany, which has a much larger population than Britain as well. And the Prime Minister said from here that he'd be tough on crime. Gun crime is up, violent crime is up, and overall crime is up. Isn't it a reality, Mr. Speaker? Isn't it a reality that under Labour, Britain is now the crime capital of the Western world?
No, that is not correct. And as I say, under the Conservative record, crime doubled, car crime doubled, burglary more than doubled, violent crime went up 73%. But it is true, we still have a lot more progress to make, even though crime is down 25% under the British Crime Survey. That's no consolation if you're a victim of crime. But there is a crime bill going through Parliament now, the Criminal Justice Bill, that will give us tougher sentences for murder, longer sentences for dangerous sex offenders, longer sentences for violent offences, 5-year minimum sentences for gun offences, and will change the criminal justice system so that those people that are guilty are convicted in the courts. Perhaps he can explain, therefore, why, having told us he cares about violent crime, he is opposing those measures in this Parliament.
Iain Duncan Smith still has another 3 questions left.
Prime Minister, would you agree that since for the first time in history the people of Ireland as a whole, north and south, have overwhelmingly declared how they wish to live together by overwhelmingly endorsing in referenda the Good Friday Agreement? Would you therefore agree that it's the duty of all true democrats to implement the will of the people by implementing all aspects of the Good Friday Agreement? And would you confirm that your government is totally committed to implementing that agreement in full and not departing from it in any way?
We are indeed committed to implementing it in full, and if I can say this to my old friend, the part that he played in bringing about this agreement is a real tribute to him and his dedication to people in Northern Ireland. And I want to make it absolutely clear it is vitally important we continue with implementing that agreement in all its aspects, since it is that agreement and that agreement alone that offers the best chance of a prosperous future, good future, a stable future, a secure future for people in Northern Ireland. There is no other agreement on offer but the one that we negotiated, as he knows, with painstaking difficulty over a number of days. And I hope very much that as a result of what happens over the next few weeks, that we are able then to take that agreement forward and implement it in full. We've already had the most peaceful Northern Ireland in 30 years this summer, and it's important we carry on working to bring about a peace that is lasting and durable.
Charles Kennedy. Mr. Speaker, under this government since 1997, council tax has risen by 70%. Now, how can the Prime Minister justify the fairness of that, particularly the fairness of that towards pensioners?
I understand the difficulties that pensioners and others will have with council tax rises, but the job of central government is to fund local government adequately. As he knows, under the previous government, in the last 3 years before we took office, the real terms cut was about 7% in the amount of money that central government gave to local government. We've now raised it by 25% in real terms. In the end, council taxes are set by local authorities, but our job as government is to make sure that we give a proper amount of support to local government, and we are.
Charles Kennedy. Particularly since so many people, not least pensioners, are being clobbered by these high percentage increases, and that the level of support from central government is not there when and where it's needed. Wouldn't it be far better to scrap the unfair system of council tax and replace it with a tax related upon people's ability to pay?
Mr. Speaker, there's no doubt a proper debate to be had about the future of local government finance, but the Liberal Democrat proposal, which is to substitute for the council tax a local income tax, as he knows that would mean that people's income taxes would go up something like 6p in the pound. That is a huge burden for them, and the fact of the matter is, as I've said on many occasions, he simply cannot afford all the pledges that he is making on behalf of the Liberal Democrats out of raising the top rate of tax or a local income tax or any other means. And I said last week, I don't know whether people want a few more details of this, but when I said they had 70 commitments, they have got 70 commitments. They run into literally billions. It would take too long. It would go after the end of Prime Minister's questions. But they include things like £400 million for village halls. Well, we all support village halls, but £400 million, £750 million for small businesses, an extra £2 billion for road traffic access, and then a further 25 at conference. And my favourite is this. This is Commitment 65, funded training for teachers and specialists on sex education, providing them with information and material to aid honest, non-judgmental and thought-provoking lessons. But let me suggest Commitment 71 should be funded training for Liberal Democrat Treasury spokesmen to aid honest, non-judgmental and thought-provoking lessons on financial discipline.
Order. Dennis Skinner.
In view of the renewed interest in crime figures, especially on the Tory benches, will my right honourable friend consider that backstabbing becomes a criminal offence?
Iain Duncan Smith is nodding vigorously here.
Well, I want to admit that in the past few years that crime has gone up. But I regret to say that on the evidence available, there's not much we're going to be able to do about it.
Simon Hughes. Mr. Speaker, on a day when there is some interest in votes of confidence, would the Prime Minister make government policy clear on a matter that may turn out to be far more important for Britain's prosperity than matters in Committee Room 14? Will the government deny the reports this week that Crossrail faces a government axe? And will the Prime Minister give his personal vote of confidence to Crossrail so the private sector can invest knowing it will go ahead?
Simon Hughes is the Lib Dem spokesman on London.
I'm convinced that Crossrail is an important project for London, that it's well worth supporting, that it could have real benefits for Londoners, indeed for the whole of the country. It is important, however, as government, that we sit down and work out how that can be funded, because as he knows, that runs into many billions of pounds. But we are confident that if we sit down and look at this in the right way, that we can take it forward.
Lindsay Hoyle.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wonder if my right honourable friend will congratulate Doreen House, a children's hospice whose 10th birthday took place on Monday. And I hope he will send his good wishes, but also would he use his good offices to ensure better funding for hospices throughout the country, direct from the NHS.
Well, I'm very happy to send my congratulations to the hospice in my honourable friend's constituency. We do obviously give a certain amount of funding to hospices. We're well aware of the fact that they wish that to be more. We look constantly at how we can, from the NHS and in other ways as well, support them, and I will certainly take into account the comments my honourable friend has said.
Iain Duncan Smith.
So the Conservative leader has another 3 questions.
If there are further steps to European integration, the people, if there are further...
Order. There's no need to shout. I tell the honourable lady, no need to shout.
If there are further steps to European integration, the people should have their say at a general election or a referendum. That's what the Prime Minister said in 1996. When did he actually change his mind?
I haven't. If there is a single currency recommendation by the government, people will have a referendum. I do not believe, however, that the present constitution that is being discussed in Europe merits a referendum.
The Prime Minister must be the only person in Europe, Mr. Speaker, who thinks that the European Constitution has no constitutional implications for Britain. Does he agree with the French Prime Minister, who recently said that any true European would want a referendum?
No, I don't. I don't believe it's necessary to have a referendum unless you have a fundamental change in the nature of the relationship between the member state and the European Union. And I do remember, of course, that 3 years ago we were told that the Nice Treaty was something that merited a referendum because it was going to destroy parliamentary government in this country. We've had the Nice Treaty in force for several years and it has not done so. And I do not believe that this treaty that does not alter the fundamental nature between the member state and the European Union merits a referendum.
Iain Duncan Smith. Let me remind the Prime Minister then, because he's got a very short memory, what the Constitution actually provides for. An elected president, a European foreign minister, control over asylum policy, a charter of fundamental rights and a European army. All of that, which he says is only a tidying up exercise. That's why the German foreign minister said, and I quote, "This is the most important treaty since the formation of the common market." Why is the Prime Minister the only leader in Europe who won't tell the truth to his own country?
First of all, I just point out that actually a majority of countries in Europe are not having a referendum on this. I do not in any shape or form say that it's not important, but it doesn't alter the fundamental constitutional relationship. But I have to say we know the game the Conservatives are up to on this, because just a few days ago, not a few years ago, a few days ago, the Shadow Attorney General published his pamphlet, The Conservative Policy on Europe, published his pamphlet on it, and says that he wants Britain to retire to a trade association agreement with the rest of the European Union, be in what he calls Sphere 1 of the European countries, that is not a full member of the European Union. He's nodding his head. That is withdrawal from the European Union. That is now, insofar as one can work out what the policy of the Conservative front bench is, that is now the policy of the Conservative front bench. And so people can forget this about a referendum. This isn't about a referendum for the Conservative Party. This is about their desire to take Britain out of Europe. That would be a disaster for this country.
Shadow Attorney General is the Eurosceptic MP Bill Cash.
The Prime Minister has seen that crime as the issue of the day, and he's made reference to the Lords, the question of the Criminal Justice Bill. Can he explain to the House how it comes about that Conservatives, who have always been tough on crime, are now in alliance with the Liberals to shred this bill to the detriment of...
Order. Not a matter for the Prime Minister. Order. Reverend Martin Smith.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister last Tuesday week in Hillsborough felt frustrated because he and the Taoiseach were privy to the details of the decommissioning. He qualified that a little on the Wednesday question time when he said that they had certain information, not the full information. But he assured us all that if the people knew what he knew, then they would be satisfied. Can the Prime Minister then tell us today whether he himself is satisfied when we know that there's fresh procurement of weapons? Has the IRA given dates for further decommissioning? Have they given a final date, or are we still having IRA flannel?
Reverend Smith resigned the UUP whip over his unhappiness with the Commission.
Decommissioning is completed in full, and we've got to make sure that that happens within a reasonable and proper timetable. And, for example, we've set out as a government a 2-year process for normalisation in Northern Ireland. Now, I have to say, however, to the honourable gentleman also, it would be wrong, just as it would be wrong to say that we've got everything that we need, because we don't, it would be wrong equally to say we're still in the position we were several years ago. We're not. The truth is Northern Ireland has moved forward considerably, and it's moved forward because people, not least unionists, have had the courage to take difficult decisions, to negotiate with people they used to regard as enemies, and try and bring about a better future for people in Northern Ireland. And I honestly say the best thing for people like him to do, if they really have the interests of people at Northern Ireland at heart, is to try and help those working to make sure that the agreement we reached 5.5 years ago is implemented in full.
David Cleland.
Would the Prime Minister accept that appointments commissions have a tendency to appoint people like themselves? Witness the appointment of the noble Baroness Howe, who became once, twice, 3 times a lady. Would he further agree? Would he further agree that a more representative and democratic second chamber could be produced without direct elections by widening the responsibility for appointments to include devolved assemblies, local government and major voluntary and professional organisations.
Lady Howe, the wife of Geoffrey Howe, is one of the so-called people's peers.
There are a range of views on this. I mean, I've made it clear what my own position is, but I don't doubt this debate will continue over the coming months, and in the end it will be a free vote for people in this House to determine the outcome.
Michael Fallon.
Could the Prime Minister take this opportunity to clear up any embarrassment that may have inadvertently been caused to the General de Chastelain and confirm to the House that the General did not intimate to him the extent of any decommissioning that had taken place?
That's the former Conservative Minister, Michael Fallon.
I said last week at the dispatch box, and I think that General de Chastelain has done an excellent job in extremely difficult circumstances. But as both myself and the Irish Prime Minister have said, there was certain information given to us by General de Chastelain, and I had hoped very much it would have been possible to provide the full information to everybody.
Mr. Speaker, while welcoming what my right honourable friend said earlier about the reduction in deaths from cancer in this country, does he share my concern that not all women who have breast cancer are getting the drugs to which they are entitled to according to the National Institute for Clinical Excellence? Could he tell me what he is going to do to get rid of these disparities?
That was the Labour MP, Shona McIsaac.
What we can do to reduce those disparities, and I think it's a good example of how there has been significant progress, but there are still things to do. Since April 2001, an additional 200,000 women have been invited to be screened for breast cancer as a result of the expansion of the breast screening service to 65 to 70-year-olds. And as I just said a moment or two ago, there's something like a 30% increase in the numbers of consultants. The people I spoke to at the Royal Marsden yesterday were in no doubt, this is the staff, that there had been a significant improvement in cancer care over the past few years. But we have to make sure that with the new guidelines that we have, that there isn't a postcode lottery, that care is given in the same way to people throughout the country, and that's what we're trying to do. So I think it is a case of a tremendous amount of progress being made, but still more to do.
Last week I asked the Prime Minister to meet the parents of Private Cheryl James, who died at Deep Cut Barracks, and he suggested the Defence Minister meet them first, and I felt that was reasonable. However, is he aware that the legal and political advisers of the parents are to be excluded from that meeting? What could the Defence Minister possibly want to say to the parents that he dare not share with those advisers who will find out that information anyway? I would ask the Prime Minister to honour the wish of the parents and allow those advisers to attend the meeting with the Defence Minister.
There are reasons and worries why that information was given to the Honourable Gentleman, but I do understand the point that he's making. If he leaves it with me, and I will speak to the Minister of State about it, and I understand his desire to attend the meeting, so I will see what I can do about it. But the difficulty has been caused apparently by the fact that there are legal issues arising out of whatever may be said at any meeting. So if he will leave it with me, I will do my best for him.
James Plaskett.
Mr. Speaker, two elderly constituents of mine recently gave up a rented home that they loved and had lived in for many years solely because of the behaviour, antisocial behaviour of their neighbours. Does my right honourable friend agree that social landlords need to be given stronger powers to tackle antisocial tenants, and having given them those powers, that they use them?
He's absolutely right. It's one very important part of the measures that are in the antisocial behaviour bill, which is why I hope that it gets the full support of the House. And there are issues to do with antisocial behaviour orders, with social landlords, with the licensing of landlords. There are really comprehensive measures to deal with this in the bill. It won't come into effect until January or February next year, but I think it will make a real difference.
Adrian Saunders.
South West Water customers pay the highest water and sewerage charges in the country, but national benefit and pension rates do not recognise this. Is this fair?
Well, as he will know, I mean, the independent water regulator has started a review of water prices for 2005 to 2010. And obviously they will need to balance carefully consumer protection, security of supply against price. And I'm sure they will listen to the concerns that the Honourable Gentleman has expressed. But in the end, of course, they will have to set a charge for the whole of the country.
Paddy Tipping.
Has the Prime Minister had the opportunity to reflect on his visit to Nottinghamshire last week when he met both the police and victims of crime? Police numbers in Nottinghamshire are at record levels, but performance is relatively weak. The solution of the police authority is a massive injection of extra funds. But does the Prime Minister agree with me that the sustained funding can only come about if best practices are adopted, there's a commitment to value for money, and there's a reform and revision of existing policy?
Well, I think my honourable friend is right. I think it's worth paying tribute, as I know he would, to the efforts the Nottinghamshire Police have made recently, because their latest figures show robbery down 9% and overall crime down almost 3% compared to the previous quarter. The funding levels have gone up. I know there are still issues to do with funding in respect of Nottinghamshire, and I heard those concerns when I was there last week. But I also think he's right in saying that there is best practice, and if we can get some of that best practice moved across all authorities, including Nottinghamshire, then it's the combination of the extra investment, the extra officers, and the reform that will do the trick. But I have to say, when I was talking to the Nottinghamshire gun crime unit in Nottingham, they also laid stress on the need for changes to the law, and it's why I come back to the point this criminal justice bill will be very, very important in giving the police the powers that they want. It really should be supported.
Elfyn Lord. Mr Speaker, in June, a constituent of mine, Lance Corporal Tom Keyes, was unfortunately one of the 6 military policemen killed in Al-Majar Al-Kabir. Since that time, strenuous efforts have been made by his parents and by myself to receive some basic answers to some basic questions. And the only consistent answer from the MOD is that we may never know what happened. With great respect, I wrote to the Secretary of State for Defence last week asking for an urgent meeting so that the parents can be persuaded, or at least convinced, that something serious is going on in terms of the inquiry. May I ask, please, the Prime Minister to intervene personally to ensure that that meeting does take place urgently?
I mean, I'm sure that my right honourable friend will want to meet the honourable gentleman and his constituents, and I once again give my condolences to them for the loss that they have suffered. And the Ministry of Defence, I know, and the Army out there are trying to do everything they can to find out exactly what has happened. And if they say that they may never be able to know exactly what has happened, that may simply be the truth. I mean, that may be the truth that people have to know because of what happened. But I know that they are making every possible attempt to lay the minds of the families to rest, and I'm sure he will get further information from the Secretary of State when he sees it.
Anthony D. Wright.
Many of my companies in Great Yarmouth often mention to me the problems that they have with skills shortages and trying to recruit skilled craftsmen for the industries. But they also recognise that the substantial investment that there's been in university and in encouraging students to go on to university. However, there's many students that don't have the desire or indeed the academic ability to go on to university education. However, they would like to go into the skills training. What is the Prime Minister doing to try to redress this particular problem of the skills shortage and trying to encourage those students that I represent in my constituency that want to go into apprenticeships that are being denied that access into that particular trade?
Well, I think my honourable friend raised a very valuable point, because we're spending on work-based training for young people around about almost £1 billion a year. And that is important because, as he rightly says, some young people will want to go into an apprenticeship rather than to university. We now have over 230,000 young people undertaking modern apprenticeships in England, and that is the highest number of modern apprenticeships ever. And 67,000 of those, I'm pleased to say, are in manufacturing and engineering. So it is important to realise we have the possibility, through a combination of widening access to universities and getting more people into modern apprenticeships, to provide high-quality education and skills for all our young people.
Henry Bellingham. Mr. Speaker, can the Prime Minister confirm that a number 10 spokesman recently proposed that local councils should be forced to hold a referendum before increasing council tax by more than double the rate of inflation? However, does he recall that 2 weeks ago he agreed that the Treasury Red Book actually forecasts a 7.4 increase in council tax for next year? So why does he go around the country raising people's hopes when he knows he can't deliver?
I have to say I haven't come across those particular comments by number 10 spokesman, but in relation to council tax, again, as I said in answer to an earlier question, the fact is central government are providing large real terms increases to local government. Now, what cannot possibly help the council taxpayer is the policy of the party opposite, which are massive cuts in public spending, because those cuts would necessarily impact, well, they say no, that's what they said. That's what their leader said. He said I'm just quoting what the leader said, which is that there will be a 20% cut across the board. And how is that going to help council taxpayers, is what I say.
John Grogan.
Whilst accepting the fact that my right honourable friend has no reverse gear, might it not be possible, if only for a moment, to find a neutral gear on the subject of student top-up fees and examine again the alternative systems of student finance, which would allow students from hard-working families, perhaps just above the threshold of any bursary scheme, to make their university choices on the basis of which course best suits them, rather than on cost?
I think the trouble is if we do stay at neutral, what it means is that universities desperately need more money. We need to widen the access to universities. I know my honourable friend wants to see more and more people going to universities. And the only way we're going to be able to do this is to get more funding to the universities. Now, the government's going to put in more funding, but we think it is fair to get rid of the upfront fees, to say that no one pays those, but instead you pay something on graduation as a graduate. And to give them an example, it would mean, for example, a graduate paying back fees, earning £18,000 a year, is paying something like £5 a week. Now, I don't think that is unfair. And what is more, at the moment, we're actually getting rid of fees. In fact, the bottom 40% of the population don't pay fees. We're looking at how we give help to lower income families, but the one thing we can't do is end up in a situation where the status quo is maintained and we actually end up, as the Conservatives want, cutting the number of students at university.
Michael Mates. When the Prime Minister took the decision in the spring to postpone the elections in Northern Ireland, many people thought that was a right and brave thing to do. He's now called an election when the stumbling block of arms decommissioning, which meant the setting up of an executive was unlikely, is still there. Hasn't he now got the worst of both worlds?
Michael Mates is a former Northern Ireland minister.
I don't believe so, because I think that it would be impossible, frankly, to postpone indefinitely elections in Northern Ireland. I think it's important that people renew their democratic mandate. But I would also say to him, we've actually made a lot of progress since March. Now, we weren't able to make all the progress we wished for, but we now have a clear undertaking from the IRA to the cessation of all paramilitary activity. We've actually got now an independent monitoring commission that is able to look at any paramilitary activity that is undertaken, and if it is undertaken, declare it, and declare it as a breach of the promises that have been given, whether by the IRA or by any other group. And we've also got a situation where, frankly, we've got the best chance of a proper working relationship that we've had for years between the various people in Northern Ireland. Now, there's always a judgment to be made about this. But I think that in the 5.5 years since the Belfast Agreement, the Good Friday Agreement, the truth is we've come an enormous way in Northern Ireland. And I think the most sensible thing is for people to recognise these processes are always difficult, the movement is always incremental, it's often absolutely painstaking, but it's worth it. Because if you look at Northern Ireland today, frankly, in terms of the living standards and quality of life for most people there, it is unrecognisable from 10 years ago.
Order. Statement, Secretary Clark.
And a historic Prime Minister's questions comes to an end there. It's pretty low-key, PMQs. The Conservative leader went 3 questions on violent crime, 3 questions on the need, in his view, for a referendum on the European Constitution. Did that performance sway you one way or the other, Mr.
Oh,
Amess?
I thought it was a really strong performance, and the pressure he must have been under, I think he did really well, and the 2 subjects he chose, I think the British people would be pleased with. It's just a shame as ever Pinocchio didn't answer anything and didn't take responsibility.
Did it sway you?
I think colleagues would be impressed. I think crime and the European
Constitution... No, I didn't ask about your colleagues, I asked about
would...
you. You're not speaking on behalf of your colleagues. You were impressed.
I was impressed.
OK, I knew we'd get there in the end, or not usually. What was your view?
My view was that Blair looked incredibly happy, as he well might. He's the luckiest man around today. And Iain Duncan Smith's performance was pretty average. 3 questions on the violent crime seemed few many too many for me. Good to tackle him on the referendum because it's perfectly true we've done nothing about it and it's a weakness, but it's also a complicated issue within his party as a one to pick in terms of a unifying structure. I wouldn't have thought it made really very much difference to him, his performance today, except that I will agree there, he must be under one hell of a lot of pressure and he didn't break down and cry.
He is indeed.
So full marks for that.
Parts of it I was going to break down and cry. Andrew Marr, when we were watching that, I said to you, you really think he's right to grow in Europe, but you made a point I hadn't thought of, which is that it does play to his core vote on these people sitting behind him.
Among the people whose votes he needs this afternoon are a lot of people who fear that in the kind of melee of an election they might end up with somebody who was more in favour of Brussels and the EU than they've got. So he does have to remind and reassure people, particularly on that wing of the party, that he is their man, that he's solid on that and that he won't shut up about it. And to be fair, I mean, it was a big part of his speech at the party conference. He has been going on about the Constitution for a long time. I mean, he's not a man where the word sort of grace would normally apply. He's an awkward man in many ways, Iain Duncan Smith. But I have to say also that I think over the last 48 hours in particular, he has shown extraordinary grit and dignity.
Under fire.
Yeah, I mean, the pressure on him is utterly appalling. And I thought, given all of that, it was a remarkably poised performance.
And Charles Kennedy, Daisy, he went on the community tax and the size of, or the council tax as we call it now, and the size of the bills. In a sense, moving into sort of Tory territory. A lot of older voters, Conservative with a small c, having these thumping 13% increases.
But of course, then we had the most extraordinary performance, almost of the day, of Tony Blair doing his normal Lib Dem bashing. It's completely, utterly, it deserves to do it if he wants to do it, but really going on and on and on and on. And that's not what Prime Minister's questions is all about. He's supposed to be answering questions, not reading reams of stuff from his notes.
It's a very threatening question, though, that. I mean, the council tax is a hideous issue, and the discrepancy of it, I mean, especially if you think of what it's like in London, is vast, and it is going to rumble and it's going to blow up, and actually it's terrific that the Lib Dems are taking it on.
Looking at it and is considering thinking the unthinkable, and is considering...
should have shut him up, should have shut the Prime Minister up.
I think earlier speakers would not have allowed Tony Blair or any Prime Minister to go on like that and to carry on reading out stuff. They would have shut him up before.
Right. Of course, he was being encouraged by the whole House, wasn't he? Going, more,
but it was pretty
more. But
so we now
a waste of parliamentary time.
Andrew, he's had his PMQs, the IDS. He now addresses the 22 committee at 2:30 this afternoon. The Tory backbenchers, they'll all be there.
A light lunch, and then he's up in front of them.
And then they go straight into the voting almost immediately after.
It'll be interesting to see what he says, to hear what he says, even if only at second hand. But I assume that one of his points is going to be, once you start a leadership process, it could take many months. You can't be sure how bloody it will be. You have no idea whether you'll really get a clean jump to a new leader or whether you're just going to have mayhem.
OK, we're going to leave it there. I thank you for joining us. Give us a call after the 22 committee.
Or outside
the door. Exactly. Now, a Tory leadership election has big implications for the other parties and for politics in general. Who would Labour and the Lib Dems most fear as Conservative leader? Would a prolonged leadership election give the government, as Andy Marr was saying there, a get-out-of-jail-free card for the next 3 months? How will all these Tory leadership ructions affect the Lib Dems, who want to take over from the Tories as the second party in the country? Daisy, what are the rivals up to?
Well, Andrew, if I knew that, I'd probably be a very rich woman. But what we do know, Labour and Lib Dem MPs have been sitting back and enjoying the Tory leadership spectacle, with some even spotted in the Commons wearing blue "I'm backing Iain" badges. But with the possibility of a new Tory leader on the horizon, they may be beginning to take things a little bit more seriously. Now, the Lib Dems' main concern at the moment is whether they can win enough seats in the next general election to become the official opposition and the second biggest party in Parliament. Now, buoyed by their success in the Brent by-election, they could do without a more voter-friendly candidate leading the Tory party. So is it Ken Clarke who's most likely to poop their party? And Labour have got a few things to be chewing over as well. Now, the Tories' dramatic leadership wranglings have allowed the Prime Minister to get on quietly with some pretty unpopular policies. Rows about Iraq, university top-up fees and foundation hostels have been raging within his party. Now, Labour MPs will most fear a strong Commons performer, somebody with a forensic ability to get to the truth. So is that Mr Howard, who's going to make the Labour ranks quake in their boots at PMQs? Well, Laura, what did they make of Iain Duncan Smith today?
Well, Daisy, thank you very much. We've been watching PMQs here in Beaconsfield, and with me once again is Jonathan Steele, who's the constituency chairman here. We're joined also now by Roger Kendrick, who's a local party donor, and also Lenora Goodman, and you're a Tory party member here. Jonathan, briefly, how did he do at PMQs today?
Well, I think he chose two extremely safe topics for him. In fact, they were such safe topics it was almost boring in terms of being contentious, and it was not contentious. Everybody agrees about crime anyway, and Europe's a safe option because everybody in the party has almost the same view about Europe.
OK, Roger, how did he get on at PMQs?
Well, the Labour government wasn't elected to take this country into a European constitution, and Tony Blair's position on it is totally untenable. But I'm afraid Iain Duncan Smith didn't really land the punch today.
OK, all right, Lenora, how did he get on at PMQs?
I think I agree with Roger Kendrick on that last remark, and I think Iain Duncan Smith did better than I expected.
OK.
Difficult day for him.
OK, all right, well, let's move on now. These what have been very difficult times for the Tory party, and we may be looking at a 2 or even a 3-month leadership contest. That's going to be damaging for the party, isn't it? What effect is it going to have?
Yes, let's hope that it doesn't go the whole 3 or 6 months or whatever it is. I mean, it could be over, and I really hope it is over in a much shorter time than that, so that we can get on with the business of defeating the Socialists and the Liberal Democrats, particularly in local politics as well as national politics.
But surely,
let's get it over with.
But surely all these business are going to affect and perhaps benefit Labour and the Lib Dems. I mean, look at Brent East, where the Lib Dems did so well.
But that's why I think we should have this now rather than later, because the general election is still possibly 2 years away, in which case we do have time to get our act together in time for the general election.
OK, Roger, I'd like to bring you in here. It seems to be a Tory speciality now, tearing each other apart. Aren't the other parties just going to take advantage of this?
Well, I don't think that's particularly important. At the end of the day, the Labour Party is split from top to bottom, and there are some differences of opinion in the Conservative Party, and you would expect there to be differences of opinion. The important thing is that the Conservative Party now needs to choose the person who's going to be the next Prime Minister of this country, and that is far more important than any short-term difficulties that may be caused.
OK, Lenora, how is this going to affect the party?
Well, it is going to be difficult for the next few weeks, but I agree with Jonathan Steele. I would like the members of Parliament to choose somebody and give them a resounding vote of confidence in whoever they choose, and that perhaps they'll give us that they will choose somebody who's got sort of 60 to 80% support from the members of Parliament,
but even
to make it easier for us.
Even though, and briefly, once there is a long-term leader, won't all this trouble have caused long-term damage for the party?
Not if the leader manages to deal politely and nicely with you in the media and get our points over. And I think there was only one person who managed to do that in the last week.
And who was that, very briefly?
That was Michael Howard.
OK, all right, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed all for joining us. We may have more of a clue who will be the next leader by the end of today, but from Beaconsfield, that's all from us.
All right, Laura, thank you for that. Quite a lot of pro-Michael Howard sentiment coming from the Tory activists in Beaconsfield. Let's see what other politicians make of that and of the impact of this leadership on politics as a whole. Joining me for the second day running, a privilege, as David Frost would say, Anne Widdecombe, Conservative MP, the Liberal Democrats' Deputy Leader, Ming Campbell, welcome, another regular, and Labour MP, Andy Burnham. Welcome to you as well. Does it fill you with fear and trepidation that your man who has something of the night about him, in your famous phrase, could be your next leader?
Well, I'm not going to join in the speculation on who could or couldn't be leader until I know. Until I know that we have a leadership election.
Well, you're going to have a leadership election.
No, this, of course, is how all the turmoil comes about. You invite us to speculate, and we play the game. When we have a leadership election, Andrew, I'll answer you just the question that you've asked me. Yeah, I can come back tomorrow.
Well, all right, answer me this on the vote of confidence election, which you are definitely going to have today.
Yes.
Which way are you going to vote?
I'm voting in favour of Iain Duncan Smith.
Do you think you'll be on the winning side tonight at 7 o'clock?
Well, I hope I will be, but I don't know. I can't answer that question. All I know is that he's done everything that we asked him to do, from the gains in the council elections to the development of serious policy. to the lead in the opinion polls that we had before all this nonsense started. So, you know, given that he has kept faith with us, why wouldn't we keep faith with him?
A question I'll leave you to put to your colleagues of the 22 committee this afternoon. Who would the Lib Dems most fear?
Well, we don't fear any of the possible candidates because I don't think the problem is one of leadership. I think the problem is one of the Conservative Party itself. And when people come to write the political history of the last 25 years, I think they'll go back to the circumstances in which Mrs Thatcher ceased to lead the Conservative Party. And since then, there's no doubt, there's been a division. It's put rather crudely between modernisers and traditionalists. But looking as objectively as one possibly can from the next door benches, there's no doubt the Conservative Party has lost its way in circumstances one simply wouldn't have envisaged. This is the most successful political party in the history of politics in Western Europe. And look what's happened. It's had 4 or 5 leadership elections in the course of the last 7 or 8 years, and each time it's done so, it has had no visible effect upon its attraction to the electorate in the United Kingdom.
I'll give you a quick reply to that.
I've just never heard such rot. First of all, when we passed from Mrs Thatcher to John Major, we immediately went up in the polls and we won the succeeding election, which nobody was expecting us to win.
And then what happened?
And we won, and what happened was that your party, which had been boasting about how it was going to do well, didn't actually.
What happened was John Major had to ask for a vote of confidence.
You have actually said that every time we have had a leadership election, it has not benefited us. I'm just saying that the most dramatic one of all, from Thatcher to Major, had an immediate impact.
He
also won his vote of confidence. He won his vote of confidence. He led us for 7 years.
Let me bring in let me interrupt this dialogue between the two, and Hegelian dialogue, if I may say so, and bring in the Labour MP, Andy Burnham, who's been listening to that. Michael Howard gives Gordon Brown a pretty tough time at the dispatch box. Well, he could do the same to Tony Blair.
I think Ming's absolutely right. The problem's not the leader, the problem is the party. I mean, they have form here. Since Margaret Thatcher went, they did the same to John Major. They did the same to William Hague. Really, I just think I actually feel a degree of sympathy for Iain Duncan Smith. I think he's got.
Do you want me to wipe up these crocodile tears now?
I think he's got a shower.
What did
really,
we do to William
the Parliamentary Conservative Party
What did we do to William Hague?
And they've undermined him.
What did we do to William Hague?
They've backstabbed him.
What did we do to William Hague?
He was subject to the same speculation. He was subject to the same whispers.
We didn't get rid of William Hague.
It seems to me that you can't stop plotting, you can't stop conniving, you can't stop backstabbing. I mean, I think in this job is probably second to the Chief Executive of Leeds United. Is probably the worst job in Britain. It's impossible.
Well, the worst job in Britain may be about to be Chancellor of the Exchequer if the economy continues to go the way it goes and interest rates go up and taxes have to go up and so on. And your government is divided on every major issue that faces it at the moment. Tuition fees, foundation hospitals, Europe and so on. Iraq, thank you, Anne. You can be my scriptwriter. Every single one. But of course, at the moment, you can carry on. You can even kind of elide what General Chastelain told the Prime Minister. But if you did get a formidable Tory leader, the culture could change.
Andrew, the thing that they can't deal with is that they've got a strong, successful Labour Party. They cannot understand, they can't deal with that fact. And that leads them to panic and implode upon themselves, to plot, to undermine each other. And they're just a scrabbling mess at the moment. It's actually quite depressing to watch what they're doing.
They don't even trust your Prime Minister anymore. Your own party doesn't trust him anymore.
Campbell, you've been quiet for a while.
Amongst each other.
I think what's staggering is so many people in the Tory party actually appear to want this job. Because on one view, it is extremely difficult. And I thought today, actually, I know you've discussed Prime Minister's questions in detail, but I thought it was a kind of paradigm today. There was Iain Duncan Smith, dogged, determined, unimaginative, and behind him a lot less support in terms of noise and just body language than he was entitled to expect. And the truth is that he has found himself in a virtually impossible position for a long time. And the Conservatives really...
We've been out of power 6 years, that's all.
Just hold on for a moment.
Just 6 years. How long have you been out of power? How long have the Liberals been out of power?
The Liberal Democrats have never been in power. They're a new party.
And the point is here, I don't think we're having a go. You said rightly he deserves some loyalty. He's done something. I mean, the point is that no one agrees with you in your own party.
If you hadn't interrupted so rudely, I was going to pay you a compliment, which was you had demonstrated that you were going to show your loyalty. If others in your party had shown the same loyalty to Iain Duncan Smith, then he would undoubtedly not be in the position he is now. And the other point I want to make is I think he's shown a fair amount of dignity in the course of the last
Yes,
40 years, as indeed has his wife, who's found herself right in the teeth of the gale.
Indeed, and she has shown incredible amount of duty. Let us now come full circle. Did you ever think that your man, who had something of the night, would turn out to be something of a white knight for the Tory party?
I don't know that I can see the description you've just launched. And as I say, I'm not going to speculate about potential leaders, but what I would say about Michael is this. First of all, he has very grittily stayed on the front bench when a lot of other heavyweights have left it. Secondly, he has undeniably, as you say, landed blows on Gordon Brown. And he has been extremely loyal to a succession of leaders. And I don't think you can take any of that away from him in whatever.
And so could a Michael Howard Tory party and an Anne Widdecombe Conservative MP, are these two facts that could exist side by side?
Oh, I'm all in favour of peaceful coexistence.
I think what we're seeing is the slow death of the Conservative Party, and it's not a very edifying spectacle.
You're joking. We've been out of power for 6 years, that's all. That's all.
They,
you were like 3 times
18 years to get
18
your act together,
it took him.
Yes, but
well, we got our act together.
We should all have in mind. I mean, I've been through this. When we had a botched merger with the SDP, it takes you a long, long time to recover from that kind of internal dissension. And there's no doubt it took Labour 18 years to recover from the longest suicide note in history.
Oh, we're going to have
the
to be
Tories,
quicker, aren't we?
the Tories may find it just as long to get back.
All right, we're going to have to move on. If Daisy wants a day off, Anne, I'm sure you can come in and do the big board next week, the way you were helping me there.
It's not Daisy's job I'd be worried about, Andrew, it's your own.
Oh, thank you for these helping words, Ming, and we'll see you next year on the Daily Politics. Thank you all very much. Now, let's take a quick look at some of the other political stories making the news today. Ministers are proposing a new commission for equality and human rights to replace the existing organisations that tackle discrimination. It would mean the end of the Commission for Racial Equality, the Disabilities Rights Commission and the Equal Opportunities Commission. And later today, the Commons will debate and vote on a motion to reclassify cannabis to a Class C drug, where it will be ranked alongside antidepressants and steroids. Under government plans, most cannabis users caught using the drug would receive a warning rather than being prosecuted. Ministers want the police to spend more time cracking down on hard drugs such as heroin and cocaine. Takeaway food shops are to be made responsible for the litter dropped by their customers. The government wants shop owners to sign up to a voluntary code and help reduce rubbish such as burger wrappers and kebab containers by installing bins and providing litter patrols. High levels of litter on the streets are being blamed for an increase in the number of rats. No reference there to the Conservative leadership contest. My next guest is the 3-times Oscar-winning cricket lover, who also happens to be a lifelong supporter of the Conservative Party. Sir Tim Rice, best known for lyrics in the music, Jesus Christ Superstar, Evita, but today he's wearing his political hat. We welcome you to the Daily Politics.
Thank you.
What do you make of this leadership battle?
Well, I think the thing that strikes me is the appalling system that produced Iain Duncan Smith.
You mean the voting system?
Yes, that's almost entirely to blame, with the party ending up with somebody who nobody really quite wanted as much as they should do. I mean, it was insane to get rid of Michael Portillo so early. Either you go to the grassroots with everybody, with 6, 7, 8 candidates, or you don't go to the grassroots at all and leave it up to the MPs. Personally, I would leave it up to the MPs, so I think know best who they've got to work with, who would lead them. And if they go through this system again, that's what worries me.
Do you think that today's leadership or vote of confidence on Iain Duncan Smith was inevitable, that it had to come?
I suppose so. I mean, I honestly don't know is the answer to that.
If you had a vote today as an MP, would you vote for or against?
I think I'd probably vote against, because I think almost for Ian's sake, I think, you know, he's got himself into a situation very unfairly. I think he was, you know, he's a great guy. He's done a good job, but I think the situation is, and it isn't his own fault. It's the fault of this stupid system. He's got him into. He's in a position now where he's not going to have the leadership.
And who did you want last time round?
Well, I think Michael Portillo. I think the Conservatives missed a chance.
Which is not going to be a choice, I don't think, this time for you.
Who knows?
And are you in agreement with other people we've heard today that you'd go along with the Michael Howard?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think, in a funny way, I think the Conservatives can win the next election, even if they were led by a Clumber Spaniel, because I think there's an enormous, huge party out there called the Apathy Party, and the voting, which is appalling. I'm almost beginning to think, like the Aussies, we should have compulsory voting.
except I think the lack of compulsory voting will help the Conservatives enormously, whoever's in charge, because so many people in their 20s and 30s are disillusioned with the Socialists, with Tony Blair's New Labour, and also they're very ignorant. They don't really care. They really don't. They just say, oh, we don't care who's in. They're not going to vote, I think, or they aren't going to vote in great numbers. I think people, young people and people of all ages, who really want to get rid of Tony Blair and his lot, tend to be Conservative.
So why did you lose the Brent East by-election?
Well,
you were second and you came third.
That was, well, that was like 30, but I mean, that almost proves my point in a way. Hardly anybody voted. And that was something which the Conservatives were never going to win anyway. And
so it'll polarise opinion between the extremists on one end and extremists on the other.
I just think there's an enormous amount of indifference out there. I mean, frankly, almost a fair amount of indifference as to who leads the Conservative Party.
But I mean, the party under under John Major since 1992, and then William Hague, and then Iain Duncan Smith, has effectively flatlined in the polls at around 30% all that time.
Sure.
And there's no sign of any great change in that. There's one poll Iain Duncan Smith refers to, which showed them 5 points ahead. It was one poll that lasted for one day. How can you need to get at least 42% of the vote to win an election?
Yes,
You're nowhere near that.
Well, I mean, 2 years is a long time in politics, a very long time. And who knows what the boost of a new leader, whoever he may be, if indeed there is a new leader. It's not that simple. Things are very volatile. And as I said, a lot of people aren't going to vote, and opinion polls have been out in the past. I mean, I just think it's a lot closer than people think.
They've not been out by that much, though.
Well, there's one poll which puts the Conservatives ahead.
No, that was the one that followed immediately the Tory conference. Then when the poll was done again.
For a long time, the Conservatives were way, way behind Labour. Now they're sort of level pegging.
I mean, Tim, you've been associated with a huge number of very popular things in your career. You're presumably very good at working out what's popular and what's not, and what's going to be a hit and what's going to be a flop. And what could the Tories do, or what could politicians of all shades do to make themselves more popular?
Well, I'm not sure they want to make themselves more popular in the sense of
make people
pandering.
vote.
I mean, spin and everything has been really disproved as something that wins people over in the end. You've got to be honest, I think, and I think what Iain Duncan Smith has done is he's put forward some interesting policies which are honest, well thought out, and that is the only way at the end of the day that the Conservatives are going to get back in.
Let's get some emails in a second,
well,
but while Daisy's looking through them, let me ask you this. Do you, on the assumption that Mr. Duncan Smith doesn't get through tonight and that the front runner, Michael Howard, does win, his campaign's already up and running, I'm told. If that's the, what do you make? Can the Conservatives really make headway with someone who in the mid-1990s was regarded as one of the most disliked politicians in Britain?
Well, is that true?
Yes.
I mean, whenever... well, he's not now.
I'm not saying... No, I understand that, but can they make huge headway?
Well, yes, of course they can. I mean, Tony Blair was God in 1997. He's now regarded as a cynical Pinocchio. Somebody was making a cheap jibe.
That could be the name of a new musical.
Yes, it will be, don't worry. I mean, things change enormously over, and 6 years...
Would you be happy with Michael Howard?
Yes, certainly. I'd be happy with anybody as long as it was settled. I would be happy with somebody, the first thing he does is to get rid of this daft system of electing a leader. I hope that if it is Michael Howard, I hope there's nobody opposing him, so we don't have to go through 6 months of gradually whittling candidates down from 6-5.
Well, I mean, this is the other thing that has been written today about, obviously, the Queen's speech is on November the 26th. It's merely a month away. And if they don't have a leader in place for that, that will be, another open goal miss.
And one of the problems Iain Duncan Smith's had, which again is not totally his own fault, is he's had pretty bad support from the heavyweights. And if you could get
who
more,
do you mean?
Well, Portillo, Clark, all these guys, William Hague, although that's a different case. I mean, I think William Hague's been impeccable in staying out of it. But if you could get a leader now that had 5 or 6 of these big names, these big guns, they'd be more than a match, even in public recognition factor with the Labour front bench.
More emails, Daisy.
Well, Connor from County, there's so many different opinions on who the leader should be, but Connor from County Down says, talking about IDS, a gentleman and an excellent Tory MP, but not a future Prime Minister. Quiet, nice men don't make good Prime Ministers, nor do snakes like Michael Howard, says Connor. This is Alex from Hampshire. I'm not a Conservative, however, if Portillo were to stand, I think he would be a fitting opponent for Blair. Many other people agree with him on that. The Tories will replace, this is from Mr Stevens in Wigan, the Tories will replace one right-winger with another. In 20 years' time, they will belong to the Dark Ages. So obviously he's looking for more of a Portillista moderniser. George in Erith. IDS should be given the opportunity to show Blair the door-marked exit, as he is a player, actor, poser, liar, cheat, warmonger.
That's Mr. Blair he's
That's
about.
Mr. Blair,
Just to clarify
not
that.
Iain Duncan Smith.
Give me another one.
And then another interesting one with a totally different angle. Surely David Davis cannot be serious. This is from Andrew. Seriously be considering leadership challenge. His majority is only just under 2,000. He faces the real possibility of losing his seat. And this is something that's also been said of Michael Howard, that his seat isn't as safe as it might be.
But of course, once you become party leader, you tend to win even
the
marginal
theory is you
seats
become...
because you're on national television every day and you
Yeah.
dominate the campaign. I suppose, let me put it to you this way, a lot of the younger Conservative MPs who may themselves harbour leadership ambitions down the road, Michael Howard's not a bad interim choice for them, because on the day after the election, maybe he's done well but he hasn't won, then they'll probably have another leadership election and some of the young Turks will come forward.
That's highly possible. I think it's a great pity that Michael Howard wasn't made leader in 1997 with maybe William Hague as number 2. I think whoever was going to lead the party in the last election would have lost. You know, I mean, it was a lost cause in 2001, and I think Michael Howard would have probably been a very good leader for that. I'm not saying we want him to be a loser, but had he lost, then William Hague could have stepped up. I mean, there are endless possibilities. I mean, but I think in the situation now, I think Michael Howard would. I mean, I think his image has changed. He hasn't changed. He's always been a nice guy, but the perception of him has changed. And if they all get behind him, that's great. Just get behind anybody, really.
We're going to leave it there. That's it for today. Thank you, Tim Rice. On the day when we hear that Michael Howard's campaign for leader is already up and running, his campaign manager is Liam Fox. And if Mr. Duncan Smith loses tonight and this vote of confidence, Oliver Letman will join as well. There's about 6 hours to go until we know the fate of the Conservative leader. We'll be back at 11:30 tomorrow morning with all the fallout and all the analysis. How could you miss it? Bye-bye.
Do you ever wish you could get a bit more choice from your telly? Well, there are now 6 new BBC channels you can get for free. All you need is the right kit. Basically, there are 3 ways to go: cable, satellite, and now there's a new way, Freeview. You'll need a small box like this one. There's no subscription, just a one-off payment of around £80. You just plug it into the back of your TV, and away you go. You'll get around 30 channels, including the 6 new ones from the BBC. Keep up with news and current affairs any time of the day with BBC News 24. There's new comedy, entertainment, and late-night EastEnders on BBC 3. Get the latest in documentaries and the best of world cinema on BBC 4. And of course, there's the CBBC channel and CBeebies for the little ones. So, if you want to find out more about how to get the 6 new BBC channels on cable, satellite and Freeview, just call 08700 10 10 10 and we'll send you a free guide.